Right, exactly.
All right, just for fun, let's take a couple minutes and just you share with a couple people. Now let's just share with a couple. What are some of the things you either said or heard? Some of the things you take with you. Some of the things you're going to make sure make it out of the house before this meteor strikes. By the way, I did just pick up prophecy recently, but I don't know of anything that's going to happen. So it's not prescience or anything. So, what are some of the things you either thought about that you grabbed or that somebody told you and you thought was an interesting takeaway?
Computer.
What is it?
Computer.
Computer. That definitely got your life on it. All right. Mike's grabbing his phone. Be able to call everybody and tell them that, hey, my house has been connected. You got to be able to post it on Facebook. Facebook never didn't happen. Hey, you can put that down later. Mark safe with hypothetical president. Some other things you grab. Grab this Bible. We a couple years ago we had an opportunity. It wasn't a meteor strike, but you get these incidents that come up real quick, and you got to just like grab everything. Where we live, there's during the summertime especially, there's kind of an ongoing threat of wildfires. There's a lot of grasslands and stuff around us, and so if we don't get rain for a period of time, you start getting nervous about wildfires and stuff. And so we started seeing the smoke and didn't know where it was, and started coming closer. And then the police started coming through the neighborhood saying, "Hey, you guys got to go. You got about an hour to get out of here." So we had the opportunity to decide what are we taking with us. And so we were throwing stuff in the van left and right. And I think the things that we settled on. Now you can tell me if this was cheating or not based on what I said. What we did was we grabbed a big bin and I filled it up with all of Linda's photo albums. She's been scrapbooking for years, and since there's a certain date where all of our photos became digital, and so those are all stored somewhere in the cloud, but there's years worth of photos that don't exist anywhere other than in these photo albums. So we filled bins up with these photo albums and packed all those in there. I have a quilt that my grandmother made when we got married that we hang up, and so I made sure that got folded up and put away and taken with us. And I did at the time grab my computer and throw it in the car, but now everything in that's in the cloud too. So I'm like, if I'm having to make some choices as to if I have to make room, that wouldn't be the end of the world. I wouldn't at least wouldn't lose everything. But those are probably the three things I probably would have grabbed just to head out. Things like this are interesting because they make you start thinking about, well, what do you value? What's important? We're going to talk here specifically about the concept of honoring in just a moment. When you honor something, how do you honor it? And that has to do with, and it's connected to the concept of value. So just be thinking about that. What determines our values? I got a couple right here down in the front row. Looks like maybe two back there. So what do we value? That's what we're going to be thinking about. If you want to take your Bibles and turn those to Romans chapter 12. You also have it printed there on your handouts. Find it quickly and easily. We started a series a couple weeks ago on the concept of one another's. We did members one of another, just kind of set the whole stage that we're connected and our actions influence each other. 2 weeks ago, we looked specifically at love one another, and that introduced a couple of concepts that we're going to develop this week and maybe in the weeks to come. If you want to think of these as more like applications of loving one another, but it's other places where scriptures tell us you need to do this for each other. These are things that we are expected to have define our interaction with each other. As Paul's writing to believers in churches, our applications of that are going to be pretty straightforward. As believers, just anytime we interact with other people, these are things that we should be held accountable for. This is how our behavior should be defined. And in particular, when we interact with other believers, if Paul's writing to churches saying this is what you ought to do one for another, then that becomes very specific instruction for what happens when we do church. When we meet together with other believers, what are we supposed to be doing? Church is not supposed to be, we've talked about this before, church is not supposed to be just a spectator sport. It's not just you come in, you punch a clock, you leave, go home, and forget it ever happened. The reason God asked us to gather together for church is because there's supposed to be some kind of interaction that takes place. There's some sort of responsibility that we have with other people that can't be done in any other way. That there's some things that you just can't, and I understand this happens sometimes and it's necessary sometimes, but there's some things you just can't get from streaming. There's some things you just can't get from just sitting and listening. There's something that happens when we interact with other believers. That's what we're looking at, is what does that interaction look like? How are we supposed to treat each other? So we're going to develop a little bit of the lesson from last week by focusing specifically on the concept of prefer one another. Now, 2 weeks ago when we looked at loving one another, let me just kind of remind you of, because we're building on that, the idea of love for another, we said, wasn't just a goal, that's a commandment. Loving each other, we said, is the means by which God uses that interaction of loving one another is the dynamic through which evangelism occurs. By this shall all men know you are my disciples if you have love one for another. And then we spent some time looking at what loving one another looks like. The idea of sacrificing ourselves for the sake of someone else. And that could be giving up a right, that could be giving up a privilege, anything for the good of another person. So that last concept is specifically what we're going to build on this week with prefer one another. If you look at your verse there in Romans chapter 12 verse 10, he says, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another. One another from this verse is specifically preferring one another and what that means. Now to get there, I want to kind of just walk through the passages. I want to walk through this verse to make sure each one of these components makes sense. Then we'll come to the end and we'll think about some applications. What would this look like? What does this not look like? Things like that. All right, so his first phrase there in chapter 12, verse 10 is to be kindly affectioned. Be kindly affectioned one to another. Now, as we go through this, I'm going to back up and look at the words that are here. Not because we need to impress each other with Greek and languages, and it certainly is not that you can't study the Bible without knowing the original language. We've got a good translation, and you're going to find out it means exactly what it says. But sometimes there's some pictures and some images that can come out by recognizing what word Paul was using and what the connotation of that word is. That'll help us know what it means to be kindly affectioned. So let's do that. Again, it's Mike's here, so I'm not going to press anybody with Greek, I guarantee that. But the word here for that's definitely a step up. The word here that's translated kindly affection is the word philostorgos, and you look at it, oh yeah, philostorgos, yeah, I use that every day. Well, there are some words here that you might recognize in different contexts. Let me break it down. If you split that compound word up, just kind of get the flavor of the word here, you probably do recognize the idea of philos. It's one of the Greek words for love. If you've ever heard a message on love and somebody's talked about, oh, there's all these different words for love. Well, obviously this is one of them. We're going to see another way this word is used later in this passage when he says with brotherly love. That's Philadelphia. Philos is that first part of it. And so that connotation, while a lot of times these words for love are used interchangeably, I'm not sure we should be making quite all the distinctions that we always make between the different words for love. But this word does kind of have a little bit of a connotation to it. That the idea of philos love would be the idea of friendly love. Think of it this way. Remember your best friend growing up? It was that person that you hung out with all the time. You went to their house, you spent the night, you got in trouble with them. I mean, you were the two peas in the pod, right? When people mentioned your name, they always mentioned this other person's name. You liked each other, you hung out together, you enjoyed each other's company, you laughed with each other, you cried with each other. That idea of the kind of a love that you have for your friend, well, that's philos love. It's the kind of love that you would experience just when you enjoy spending time with somebody. You like being with them. You like each other. That's the idea of philos love. And the other side, the other word is actually another word that's often used in the connotation of love. And it has more the idea of family love. The kind of love, it's used in context of how you love members of your family. In fact, some speculate that you see the word storgos in there, that this may be why we associate the idea of storks with babies coming. That there's some etymology there that word, the animal stork, reminded them of this kind of word, and so maybe that's where that connotation came from. Etymologies are interesting to try to figure out. You're guessing a lot of times, but there's at least a mental connection here of connecting this idea of storgos, family love that family members have for each other, with this word. So when you put those words back together again, the philostorgos, you get a connotation that this does seem to have a very particular flavor of love to it. It's the idea of the love that you have for a friend, the love that you have for a family member, like the way you would love a brother or a sister or parents or cousins, people that you have a relationship with, so you're connected to them in a certain way. But you put them both together, and it's not just, well, I'm related to you, I have to like you. This is somebody you actually do like. You enjoy being with them. You like that. So when you put the concept together, you got family members who love each other. The idea is with a tender affection. And that's exactly why your translators rendered this, be kindly affectioned one to another. There's a love, there's a kindness, there's an affection that is expected in our relationships. So if you just look up the word itself and say, okay, well, what Philostor guys, how do they define this in a dictionary? The dictionary definition of it is the idea of a devoted, good-natured kind of emotion. A devotion to someone else. A good-natured, I enjoy being with you, happy kind of feeling. It's describing a relationship with people that are both family and friends. And I think it's interesting that the Holy Spirit uses this word to describe how Christians ought to feel towards other Christians. Remember, one of the pictures of the church in the New Testament is a picture of a family. Paul talks about his spiritual children, and he talks about viewing people in the church as spiritual mothers and fathers, and one of the most common descriptions of believers in the New Testament is brethren, that we're members of a family, that we've got God the Father, and through Jesus Christ there's a family relationship that's created. Our relationship is not just vertical between us and God, it's now horizontal between other people that are related to God, other people that are the sons of God. So we literally are, in that sense, a family. And so as family members, we have a special relationship with each other that ought to define how we treat each other. Later on, like I said, in the passage, the very next phrase, he's going to say, do this with brotherly love, Philadelphia love, that we treat each other specifically with the concept of family, but family that we enjoy, family that we like. So think about how that relates to our concept of family. How do we feel about members of our physical families? It's a rhetorical question, but you know the answer to it. Are our physical family members always perfect? No. Sometimes they kind of get on our last nerve because they do things that are kind of irritating. We're like, why did you do that? But at the same time, we recognize that it's ultimately the family relationship that defines how we treat that person. We'll put up with it. We'll get over that. We're going to seek reconciliation. We want, even if that person has done something wrong or dumb, we're like, but I'm willing to work through that. I'm willing to push beyond that. Why? Because they're family. What do we do when a family member gets in trouble? We help. How do you respond when they have a need? You meet it. I mean, is there anything we wouldn't do for a family member to help them succeed? Probably not. And so think about this as the Bible defines our responsibilities and relationships with each other in terms of family affection. As a believer, we're to view other members of our church as members of a family. Localize that and say as members of a class, an adult Bible study. That there's a relationship that we ought to be working towards and building with each other that looks around and says, we're a group that God has brought together. So let's say family. Let's think of it in those terms. Now let's take that concept of the description here, this kind affection that we ought to have for each other. And let's jump to the end of the verse and see what he says we ought to do as a result of that kind affection. What sort of action should that kind affection produce? Well, he says we ought to prefer one another. Now, something as painful as looking at original languages is to think of it in terms of grammar. If you look at this grammatically, this concept it's a participle. And if you remember from grammar, and I know this is hard, but if you remember that from grammar, participles are kind of like adjectives. They describe a verb. They tell you how to do something. Here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be kindly affectionate. That's the command. So what does that look like? What describes what kind affection is? Well, that's this phrase. He says, preferring one another. What he's doing is he's describing how we're to show that kind affection. How are we to show that brotherly love? It's the how to do it of the verse. And I always appreciate that God doesn't just tell us to do stuff, he tells us how to do it. He illustrates it. He gives us the concept of how to put into practice what he's describing. Now let's integrate this with what we did 2 weeks ago when we looked at the concept of love one another. That's certainly baked into this. He's talking about how we love one another, how we're kindly affectionate one to another. So remember what we said about love. Love is that idea of seeking the other person's best interest, sacrificing ourselves for the sake of another. That's what God did when he loved. For God so loved the world that he gave. The idea of love was sacrifice. Well, connect that with this, that the way we love one another is by preferring one another. The idea of preference to something. If you have a preference for something, you're making a choice. You're choosing one thing over something else. Those of you that work on campus, we get to eat our lunches over in the Four Winds. And if you walk into Four Winds, there's 7 different lines of food. All different choices to make. There's the salad line, which everybody just walks right past. Then there's the Italian line this week. Oh, it's been wonderful. They had wings this week. I did some honey. Just shove them right into my veins. But they've had the wings this week, and then you can go to usually there's some sort of ethnic line, like a Tex-Mex line, or sometimes they'll have an Oriental line. And you had all these different foods. And so you walk in and you say, what do I prefer today? And when you prefer something, you go to that line and you don't go to the others. Now, it's not so much a neglect. When I choose the wing line, it's not that I don't like pizza. It's just that at this moment, I prefer that. I'm making a choice to put this one in priority ahead of the other ones. So when we think of preferences, it doesn't have to be a rejection of something. It's just a conscious choice to, well, I choose this. I put this in the top place. I put this in first place. That's what the idea of a preference is. So think about the concept of preferring one another. The idea of preferring one another is to let the other person go first. To let them take the lead. To let their needs and desires go ahead of our own. If 2 of us, we each have things that we want, we each have things that we desire, and so preferring one another says, well, I'm going to defer to you. I'm going to look out for your needs rather than my own. It's not like self-hatred. Oh, I hate myself, and so I always have to go last. No, it's preferring that, yes, I mean, I have needs, I have wants, I have likes, I have things that I desire, but I have a preference for you. I have a preference for your wants and your needs and our desires. It's not so much of putting ourselves down as it is of putting others first. It's deferring to them. And Paul is saying here that this is one of the ways that we show that we love one another. We love each other by demonstrating a kind affection, letting them have priority. Now think through the implications of the opposite of that. If we seek our own interest ahead of others, if the way that we show love is to seek their interest ahead of ours, does that say something when we demand to put ourselves first over them? It probably does. When we're saying, well, but I want, so I put your needs second. Well, I desire, but what you want is less important. If preferring one another is loving one another, then a failure to prefer one another can go the opposite direction. I want you to understand there's more at stake here than just treating someone well or treating someone poorly. Our actions can reveal a sin of pride, a sin of selfishness, an unloving attitude towards others when we look out for ourselves first. When we go into situations assuming that what I want takes precedent over your desires and your needs. Preferring one another says I'm going to make deference to others. Now we're going to have an opportunity later for some specific self-evaluations and application, but for now, just personally, just think back over the last few hours of your life. Since you got up this morning, have your actions reflected a love for others, or have they reflected a selfish desire to put yourself and your desires and your wants first? We need to be willing to evaluate ourselves in light of preferring one another. Now in the middle of this, we come back to it where he says, in honor. So we know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be kindly affectionate. We do that by preferring one another. And now we have another descriptive phrase. The command of be kindly affectionate, the description of how to do it, preferring one another. Now it describes for us, you can say this is the attitude or the motivation for that preference. We're told to prefer in honor. And what this does is it distinguishes our actions from just the mere sense of obligation. It makes sure that we're doing what we do with the right heart attitude. I think you understand it's possible to obey with the wrong attitude. It's possible to obey with the wrong spirit. I heard of a little boy one time who's standing up in his chair at the dinner table and says, Johnny, sit down. He wouldn't sit down. He said, Johnny, sit down. Johnny wouldn't sit down. So Mama goes over and takes Johnny, plops him down in his chair. Johnny looks back at her and says, I'm still standing on the inside. See, there could be times where we obey, but it's not exactly with the right attitude. It's not with the right heart, with the right spirit. I think what God is asking us to do here is not simply, well, just never do what you want, always do what other people want. It's not simply a demand for compliance that we prefer one another. It's to do so for the right reasons with the right attitude. And the attitude that he defines, the reason why we're going to yield to other people, the reason why we're going to defer is because we honor that person. It's not because we're putting ourselves down. It's not because somehow, that they are forcing into submission, or we're simply going to do it out of just raw obedience. It's we do so with an attitude of honor. This is why I asked you the question at the beginning, because I want us to think through how we treat the things that we value. If you value something in your home, you're going to protect it, you're going to look out for it, you're going to take care of it. And if there is a meteor that's about to strike your house, you say, because I value this, I'm going to treat it a certain way. This is what I'm going to take with me. I've assigned value to those things. Some of them really, materially speaking, wouldn't be worth much. I mean, I couldn't sell those photo albums for, nobody would pay for it. Nobody would probably be, terribly interested, and certainly wouldn't hold the same value for them to have that quilt as it does for me. But I've decided those things are valuable, and so I'm going to treat them a certain way no matter what. I honor them by the way that I treat them. It's not so much inherent value, but it's a decision to treat them a certain way. And this is what this verse is telling us that we ought to do for others. We're recognizing and we're assigning, we're deciding the value of other people. And placing that at a higher value than we value our own wants, our own needs, and our desires. So the idea of honoring and making sure that this is the mentality through which we prefer one another is assigning worth and value to others more than to ourselves. So again, it's not about putting ourselves down. I'm not talking and advocating for low self-esteem and I'm just nothing and with me. The idea is, you know what, I'm just going to treat you as if you're important. I'm going to treat you as if you matter. That your preferences and your wants and your needs are important to me. Now, I think if we maintain that attitude, that's also going to protect us from some of the other things that go along, or that could come along with this of, what about being taken advantage of? What if what they want is bad? What if they want something wrong? Am I just supposed to defer? Well, again, if my attitude of one is honor, I want what's best for them. And so I can use some discernment to say, I can defer to you in this, but that's not best for you. So again, as parents, we're often going to do that with kids, right? They say, well, I'm going to prefer my children. If they want ice cream for supper, then they can have ice cream for supper. I'll prefer that. Well, I can also recognize, because I value them, I know that's not best for them. And so I may make some decisions about what is best for them, but I understand the motivation is still the same. Because I honor them, I'm going to do what's best for them. Because I honor them, I'm going to defer to them whenever I can and whenever it's appropriate. So I think this mentality of why we're doing it gives us that, if you want to call them checks and balances, that prevent us from simply, we're not talking about just being a floor mat for other people, and just always giving in no matter what they want to do. There may be times where we have to make some decisions, what is best for you, so I may have to say no. But at the same time, there's going to be lots of times where it just comes down to, well, I want to do this, you want to do this, I'll defer to you. I honor you more than I honor myself. So we're discussing what to have for dinner tonight. You want fish, and I want chicken, and fish is not my favorite, but I know you enjoy it. I'll defer. We're going to watch this program, but I want to watch this program, but you like that one, so I'll prefer one another. I mean, that can come up in the home in all sorts of places. But we're not talking about moral issues. We're not talking about bad things. We're just talking about things where two people have different desires about something. And coming into it with an attitude of a husband telling his wife, I value you more than I value myself, so I will defer to you. And a wife who says to her husband, I value you more than I value myself, so I'll defer to you. You gotta be careful, I suppose, that you don't turn into, I don't know if you saw the cartoon in the beginning with all four trucks sitting at a four-way stop, all four of them go, you go first. No, you go first. You go first. Yeah, I guess at some point you get to where nothing gets done, but you understand the mentality that he's describing. Think about what our homes would look like if rather than acting out of selfish ambition, we were all devoted to meeting the needs of the other people in our home. Imagine what our church would look like if we came to church, not all of us saying, well, I want this, and I want this, and I would rather do it this way. And instead we came to the church going, how can I help you? How can I be valued to you? How can I recognize and honor you in your preferences, your desires, your needs? What our class would look like if we all showed up and said, well, I'd like to do this, but I know this is something else, and so I'll defer. I'll prefer one another. That's what these verses are describing for us. We can prefer out of obligation, but when we prefer out of honor, I think we're reflecting the spirit of this verse. We're assigning to others more value than we assign ourselves. It's saying, you're more important than I am, you may go first. And if our action of preferring one another is done with the right attitude and the right motive, then we're hitting the heart of this verse. And if we're not doing it with the right heart and the right attitude, we're failing to meet the standard of Scripture. So now I want us to take just a couple of minutes and just collectively just brainstorm some things here. We're going to describe it in a couple of contexts. I've mentioned a few, but maybe you can think of some that we can help each other understand what might this look like. So let's start with this concept of being kindly affection one to another, brother to brother, honor, preferring one another. I'm going to ask the question, what would the opposite of this be? What might this look like if we don't do this? So let's start with the context of home. What are some examples of a failure to prefer one another that can come up in a home situation? It's not, you don't have to make this personal confession time. We're speaking generically here. Well, my husband didn't know. No, wait. Be careful about the personal accusations. But just in a generic sense, let's give some examples. What would a failure to prefer one another, what might that look like in our homes? Ideas?
One person might have to do all the work while the other does.
Okay. Might have one person who is just working hard, and the other person is not carrying their end, not carrying their load, not doing anything. See, that's a failure to prefer one another. I prefer you to do all the work. Well, that's not what we're describing here. That's the opposite of what we're describing. What else? Other examples?
Like frustration of a child not being able to do
Okay, frustration. It can turn out tonight. Said frustration of a child not being able to do things. Yeah.
Not eating what the wife cooks for you.
Not eating what she cooks for you. I mean, somebody puts time and effort into something, and rather than appreciating what they've done, we can respond to that in a way that does not show preference. And not paying attention to their needs and not listening to them. I think even that, just that idea of not listening to them in general, not taking time to be with that person. That person, realizing, they need to talk to somebody, they need some interaction. Some of us, depending on our jobs, you don't, get much personal interaction during the day. And so preference might be, I'm all talked out, but I know you need to interact, and so I will defer to you in that way. It might be the other way, that, you really are talked out. And, and preferring that person saying, I'll give you some space. I know you just came home. Back off of this for a little bit to let you kind of recharge a little. The idea of when we push somebody something because, well, I need this, and I need this, when there may be an opportunity to say, this is an opportunity where I could just defer to that person's needs. I know what they're wanting. I know where they are right now. My needs can wait. I can hold off on that until it's appropriate time. So definite home examples of opportunities when we fail to prefer one another. Let's move it into the context of church. What are some things that sometimes happen in church that demonstrate a failure to prefer one another? Or maybe say it this way, what are some examples of selfishness sometimes that can come up in a church context, a church setting? Fighting over seats. I mean, that's this is the traditional Baptist issue, right? You know, that's my seat. You know, have you ever been in those churches that actually have the names printed on the pews? You know, my family bought this chair 100 years ago, so this belongs to us. You know, and you know, those of us that have come up through small churches, you know, everybody does kind of have their assigned seats. You don't, and so heaven help a visitor who shows up and disrupts the whole service by sitting in the seat. Now we can joke about that, but I think you recognize there's an element of truth that somebody can come in and they can get all hurt. And I can't believe you did that. You took my seat, you know, and they get kind of bent out of shape over this. You understand, that's an example of a failure to prefer one another. Like, I want my seat, and I don't care where you sit, but I want mine. That's a great example of a failure in a church setting, sometimes to failure to prefer one another.
Kind of to that point, just making the church service like you're being recharged, you're being messages for it.
I mean, we have this concept we call it, you know, people at church shop, and you know, it's all about, you know, when we look for a church, it's all about our preferences, right? You know, I want a church that does this, and I want a church that offers this, and I want a church that has this, and sometimes we can kind of approach church as if it's all about us. And did my needs get met? And were my preferences? I didn't like that song. I didn't like that, you know, soul star. I thought that sermon was way too long. And we can find all these things that sometimes irritate us, and if we'll evaluate them, we'll find out, you know what? That's just me wanting my way. That's just me being selfish about this. Other people enjoyed and benefited and were spiritually helped by that song, and that pastor's message, that extra 5 minutes, was very beneficial to somebody who had that need. If we'll start thinking in terms of others besides ourselves, it might change our disposition towards church. And maybe if we approached church that this was the command of Scripture, that my goal in church is to meet the needs of other people rather than saying that my needs are met. I'm just throwing this out there. I suppose that God knows what your needs are, and He can make sure your needs get met, even if that's not your purpose. Even if that's not what you set out to do, I'm pretty sure that God can see your needs met through other people who are doing this as well. That's the dream situation, right? A whole bunch of people that are preferring one another, each contributing. That pretty much means that everybody's going to get something. Everybody's going to get their needs met. So the question is, what's our focus going to be? What's our disposition towards this going to be? If we were to think about this in our class, I mean, we're always tight on seating in here. Right? I mean, we can apply that, you know, that church situation with chairs and stuff. We can apply that here. I'll say, you know what, I like to sit here, but you know what, it might be better if I sat somewhere else so that somebody else could have this seat. You know, you just think about it very practically. You know, well, I don't like to sit, you know, so I'm gonna, and we leave like, you know, one chair so 2 people come in, and there's no place for 2 people to sit. Yeah, even if it's something just as simple as, you know, just fill it in. Looking out for the other guy. I'm going to leave I'm not preaching here, I'm just saying, you know, even just leave the corner seats available so that people that come in late have a place to sit. You know, I'll fill it towards the front. I like to sit up front. I know. I want to be out front either, but I don't have a choice. So, you understand how that works? I mean, it's just starting to look for ways to say, you know what, when I come to church, I'm going to look for ways to defer to other people. I'm going to look for ways to make sure other people's needs are met. It really can be that simple. I mean, those are the backside of things. Sometimes the errors are easy to see. But now turn that into, so what should I do? What would preferring one another look like? When I go home later today and I'm going to prefer one another in my home, am I going to, on purpose, look for ways to make sure those around me's needs and preferences are met? When I go downstairs in a few minutes, am I going to actively look for ways to prefer one another? Joke about seating again. That usher is going to suggest a seat for you, and your temptation might be, but I don't want to sit there. I'm going to do what I want to do. And we say, you know what? I understand what you're trying to accomplish. I understand what you're doing. I'm going to simply set my preferences aside for a moment and do what's best for others. I'm going to pray for Pastor during the sermon. If he needs an extra 5 minutes to finish his point, I'm going to be okay with that. I'm going to look for ways to, as we're getting out of the parking lot, maybe I'll take a few extra minutes to walk out slowly so that other people can get out of the parking lot first instead of me cutting people off to race out the door. You see what I'm saying? It can be very practical. It can be very straightforward as we say, you know what, Lord, you've called me. You've instructed me to be kindly affectionate. I'm going to start looking at people around me like their family. I'm going to start treating them as though they're valuable. And in doing so, I will be keeping them in Scripture. I'm going to prefer one another. Plenty for us to think about and opportunities to look for this week. Let me wrap up with a couple of announcements. First of all, tonight is our ice cream social. Now, many of you have signed up. A few of you haven't. The sign-up sheet's out there. Now, when it's all said and done, we've got plenty of people signed up with ice cream and toppings. So that means come. Even if you get to this afternoon and like, well, I wasn't planning on coming, but I think I could come. It's going to be tonight, right after the service ends. We're going to head over to the Monex Chapel, Monex Fellowship, excuse me, and we'll go over there. Now, several of you have signed up for ice cream. Please bring it. It's not much of an ice cream social without ice cream. But if you're not signed up for ice cream, if you just bring your favorite topping, whatever you want to put on ice cream. You want to bring some candy, you want to bring some goop, whatever you want to bring. We're going to have we've got all the stuff there. We've got bowls and spoons and everything. So bring your ice cream, bring your toppings, come on by. Some of you might have a great opportunity here because VBS starts tonight. Your kids will be at VBS until 8:15. So, you can have ice cream without sugaring up your kids. So that might be a good thing to do. But if your kids are with you, bring them on over. We're going to have some games and stuff set up over there. It's an informal fellowship time. So just come on over. Now, we're going to try to, we'll shoot for 5. If I can get there by 5:30. 5:30 if I can get there by 5, instead of the other way. We'll try to get there a little bit early to open up beforehand, particularly those of you that are bringing ice cream. If you want to swing by and drop it off before church, just drive by those back doors. We'll have those open there, and then we'll put it in the freezer. That way we don't have milk. Although milk is good, ice cream is better. So those of you that bring ice cream, but if you want to drop your toppings off on the way in, you're welcome to do that as well. Especially if you have something you want to bring something that is refrigerated or whatever. So definitely by 5:30, but we'll try to get it open by 5. So you can just swing by the Monex, drop by the back door, hop in there, and drop your stuff off. And then after church is over, just head over to the Monex after that. Just to point this out, one of the reasons we're doing this time today is also to celebrate a birthday. 1 year ago today, we got started. So those of you that were founding members, good for you. And you're 1 year old today. There you go. So happy birthday to Cornerstone. And there's one last announcement before I do the final slide is just refreshments. I put a new refreshment sign-up sheet out there. So if you're available to sign up for refreshments each week, we'll try to remind you the week of that your day is coming up. But if you want to go ahead and sign up there, that sign-up sheet is on the table as well. So sign up for tonight just so we know how many to expect, and then for refreshments in the weeks to come. And again, a reminder, we want to be able to help each other and pray for each other. So if you want to send me a text, you can also use Realm or Facebook if you're connected to those. You can go in there and just send an announcement for your class, and we'll email it to everybody or put it on Facebook. People will get a notification something's posted. It's a great way for us to support and help each other out. All right, I'll see you downstairs for church, and then tonight at the fellowship right after church. Have a great week.
You too. Have a